Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, today is a strange day in Diablo 4, but for a very good reason. Among a host of other news, including developer tweets and updates on the Blood Drive that we'll also talk about, there was a hotfix that hit the game last night that was absolutely major both in its purpose and its execution, and it's something that players have been getting increasingly vocal about over the last few weeks, including our own video on this channel within which I spent quite a bit of time talking about how this is the biggest problem currently in the game in Season 2 as far as making it a fun endgame gameplay loop. That problem specifically was Helltide, and while there are various steps required to improve Helltide and make it more enjoyable long term, my main gripe with it in the current way the endgame works is that a lot of people sort of just want to farm Duriel now once they reach a high enough level, once they have proper builds, just farming it on repeat. To kill Duriel, you need to kill grigoire twice, more often than not, and to summon grigoire, you need 5 living steel each time. Before this hotfix hit, a Helltide living steel chest would be the only way of getting this, and it would give you 3 living steel, so you can basically fight grigoire twice per active Helltide on average, which means 1 Duriel every couple of hours, and that is just absolutely not satisfying for an endgame loop activity. My main solution to the issue is to remove the downtime timer from Helltide and just have it constantly active but rotating areas like Blood Harvest does. But I had another idea that would be easier to implement and also very effective at making people less annoyed by this mechanic, and well, ring the bells, sound the alarms, hug everyone that you care about because they did it! And not only did they do it, but they did it really quickly. I personally expected no changes to Helltide at all for the rest of the season, in the same way that the developers seem to just not be touching overly strong vampiric powers or classes builds, even if they have bugs as a main part of their foundation. But they proved me wrong on this one specifically, and I'm very happy to say that, because they proved me wrong by making a meaningful change to the game in a relatively quick fashion, which is not something I've been able to say particularly often. In World Tier 3, living steel granted per chest has been doubled up from 1 to 2, with a small chance of doubling even further. This is great for those in World Tier 3, and it lets you farm materials that I would definitely recommend saving up for World Tier 4 anyways. Then the big one, in World Tier 4, the living steel granted from a chest in Helltide is increased from 3, which is the old one, up to 5, with a small chance of this doubling as well. This is absolutely massive, and it is exactly what I was hoping to see from this. The main issue with the living steel chests before is they just weren't valuable enough for the time that you spent on them and how rare they actually were as well, only having 4, maybe 5 at most spawn through an entire Helltide period. Before, that meant 2 and a bit grigoires at most, but now that means 4 grigoires minimum, and that is genuinely twice as good. Double the amount of grigoire kills per time means double the amount of Duriel available to be farmed too, and while yes, it doesn't fully fix Helltide, it does help a lot on the side of things where this boss is concerned at least. Not to mention that now, all Helltide chests give 1 living steel just as a baseline, so if you really want other stuff, you can still open those chests for the legendary drops and still get some living steel. This means even past the actual limit of spawns on living steel chests, you can still get more living steel per Helltide, and the exchange isn't even that bad either. Mathematically speaking, if you stick to the 75 cost armor chests, 5 of those cost 375 cinders, so only 75 more than a living steel chest, and in return, you still get the baseline of 5 living steel that you would from the big chest, but you also get a minimum of 5 legendary items on top of that, and it doesn't consume one of your limited living steel chest spawns per Helltide either. As a result, taking full advantage of an hour-long timer in Helltide now could look something like opening every single living steel chest, of course, like you used to, but then also just grabbing as many of the low-cost chests as you can find for the rest of the timer, because it isn't that much less efficient, especially if you care about speed more than pure time efficiency. Essentially, farming Duriel is now just much easier and faster and more consistent, because farming grigoire is easier and faster and more consistent, and that alleviates a fair bit of the pressure on Helltide feeling bad. And just all in all, this is a relatively small change, sure, but something I'm incredibly happy to actually see, and something I'm genuinely surprised that they both chose to do, and do as quickly as they did. As well, on top of this, they fixed the issue with living steel chests sometimes just not spawning in properly. Apparently this had to do with the Guardian Elite spawns that sat beside them, so those have been removed for now until they can be fixed, but they do plan to add them back in later. Past this, there were no stability and performance improvements in this hotfix, but we did have various fixes to things blocking people from progressing certain season journey objectives. All in all, this hotfix is like a minor client patch more than most hotfixes. It's sizable, it's impactful, and there are no negatives as a part of this either, which is nice. This is just an absolute win for us, for sure. Past that, moving on to the rest of the news from the last few days, we had another hotfix a couple of days ago, which was much smaller, just addressing the issue some players had with potent blood drops just getting blocked by a fountain as a physical object so that you couldn't pick them up. This hotfix was only a partial fix though, as we can see, this player confirming it is still happening. Adam Fletcher, the community development director, replies to this saying that the fix was only for the open world for now, and that it is still an issue actually actually inside of dungeons that will need a proper client patch before it will be fixed up completely. The next scheduled client patch that we are aware of as players is on December 5th, which is a couple of weeks from now, and so unless things change in the meantime and we get a bonus patch in between, I would expect that full fix to wait until December at least. Then we have something that we haven't talked about for a couple of weeks with all that BlizzCon excitement that was going on, and that's the Blood Harvest event that has been running for quite a few weeks now. No, not the Blood Harvest in-game Season 2 mechanic, but the blood drive that Diablo 4 is sort of taking part in, rewarding people for providing proof of blood donations in the United States of America. The goal is 666 pints of blood donated, and as of this exact moment, we are at 98%, so only a few pints away from full completion. The collection part of this ends in 5 days on November 20th, so we are probably going to make the full 100% from the point that we're at, and that means on the 22nd of November, we are all going to get a nice little collection of cosmetic weapons, a free cosmetic armor set, and if we reach that final goal, we also get a nice free cosmetic horse. Horses are always cosmetic, they don't really change speed, you know what I mean. Nothing here is necessarily mind-blowing, but it's just nice to have, and hey, free cosmetics is a really nice thing to see when you consider how the shop in this game sort of works. Then finally, we just have a bit of discussion about a tweet from one of the developers again, the thought behind it, the possible results, and the community reaction too. This is from Adam Jackson, the lead class designer for Diablo 4, who said, "I'm curious, how do you feel about amount of power minions have in relation to the player?" And there was quite a bit of specifying here, but for anyone who doesn't necessarily get it, what he's asking about is minion builds specifically. So he's not saying, hey, Bone Spear Necro, do you want us to nerf minions even harder and make Bone Spear better? He's saying while you are playing a minion build in general, do you prefer to have the minions just sort of exist while you, the player, does the bulk of the damage? Or do you want the minions to do the bulk of the damage while you sort of watch them like a business supervisor of the undead? The third option here, of course, being the way that it is right now feels good. As of the end results of his poll, there were over 6,000 votes, which is pretty damn solid. 79.3% say more power to minions, less power to players. That is entirely my expected result seeing the question, because that sort of is just what the class and power fantasy is of a minion-specific necromancer. You want to raise the dead and have them being a terrifying army of doom, not just have them hang around for moral support while you kill stuff like you could anyways without them. In second place at 11.9% of the vote was more power to the player, less to the minions, which clearly isn't as popular by any means, which is why it should say a lot that it isn't even in last place, because with 8.8% of the votes is things feel good now. If only 8.8% of people think that things feel good now, then it's a pretty good indicator that it's probably time for some pretty big changes. Personally, I think there's a bit of a balance to this whole thing too, of course. I agree with the votes here that the correct path is to just make minions notably stronger. This doesn't have to constitute a nerf to Necromancer as a class as a whole either, obviously, because they just have to manage the sacrifice bonuses that you get for giving up your minions to make up for it, so that if you sacrifice your minions, you're still quite strong. But that won't do it by itself. I'm not the first one to say this, but there should be an extra keybind or something like that for Necromancer that just lets you actually direct your minions specifically. If you walk into a room that's just full of trash mobs, but then there's like one elite in the corner that can absolutely rock your shit, maybe it does massive AoE attacks that will kill all your minions before they can do anything and destroy you, you should be able to yell at your skeletons to just focus on that one elite first before anything else. Yes, part of the fun of a minion build is to just have your minions do the dirty work, but that doesn't mean that you can't direct them in some way if they are still the main thing doing the damage. Also, this one is just sort of a me thing. I think it'd be fun if you could use minions with your corpse skills. I mean, they are still corpses, right? So why don't you get superpowered versions of corpse skills that you can spend your living minions to use? Why isn't there a neat interaction where you can use something like Corpse Explosion on your golem as fuel, which will then kill the golem, but does a massive burst of AoE damage? Something like that both feels like it is the minion responsible for the damage itself, but gives the player more control and agency as well. Just my opinion on that one though, and I could see how it would cause issues for people on a controller, I suppose. With that then, we did have a response to this tweet saying that none of the three options represent what players want, which is more minion power without lowering current player power. And Adam Jackson responds to this saying that it isn't about the power of the build, it's not about the balance of where it stands within the meta or anything like that compared to other build styles. It is simply the distribution within this type of build. No matter what, the maximum power allowed to a build is 100% total. The question for the minion builds is simply how much of that 100 is minion power and how much of it is player power. That's why they have the whole sacrifice system in the Book of the Dead. They want to make minions stronger, they can make the base class a bit weaker if they do, but then buff these sacrifices, and then you should be able to make it so that balancing minion builds doesn't nerf non-minion builds in the long run if you do it right. It is a good system for that purpose and that reason. And that just about does it for today then, everyone. Not a massive amount of different things going on, but there were quite a few meaty important ones. The increased drop rate of Living Steel in Helltide is absolutely massive, and I cannot wait to see how much more frequently that we can all take on Duriel with this change of applied, and the poll about necro minions from the lead class designer of all people helps give us a good bit of insight on what could be happening to Necromancer in the coming months. Hopefully it's all good, but I'm definitely happy to see him asking for the community's opinion on it to get a bit of a consensus on what the community actually wants to happen. Even if the sample size is a bit low, sure, it is still a great idea. Overall, it's been a solid few days, and hopefully we even get more worth talking about in the next few days, as more often than not, things worth talking about with this game are going to mean positive changes are coming, at least at the moment. And of course, when there is more to talk about, I will be here to break it all down. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.